Welcome to another episode, to this week's episode of Pax Americana. I'm Julie Roginski. I'm here with Olga Lautman. We are so thrilled that you're all here, to our friends in the United States and all of our friends abroad who probably think our country has completely gone off the deep end in the last several days, which it has. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us. Olga, I guess it's about a week after Liberation Day, which is April 2nd, where the president said we'd be liberated from, I don't know what we were going to be liberated from. I was pretty liberated from a lot of my money,
Money.
yeah, over the past week. But I want to focus on one specific aspect of who was actually liberated from tariffs and who wasn't liberated from tariffs. Just to recap for people who don't follow this as closely as some of us do, the president first uh, put tariffs, individual tariffs on individual countries, um, under a very weird formula that made no sense economically or geopolitically or in any other way. For example, he tariffed a few penguins in not far from the Antarctic. He tariffed an island that is used just for our military to station. He tariffed places like Iran, with which we don't do business. Um, he tariffed Israel, with which we do business. And Benjamin Netanyahu was in the Oval Office last week or this week, I guess, presumably for a number of reasons, but one of them, I guess, was to get that tariff lifted. Did not happen. Um, and then, of course, he got into a trade war with China, with whom we now have a tariff war to the extent that tariffs on Chinese goods are 104%. Our Canadian and Mexican friends, with whom we have a trade agreement, all of the assets that are not bound by that trade agreement are also taxed, um, which is nuts because we have had a free trade agreement with them since the 90s.
The one that Trump negotiated, by the way,
Yeah,
as the best deal ever during his first term.
yeah, of
Now
course.
they are ripping us off and everything. So
Yeah,
apparently, in the first term, it was perfect, the perfect deal as everything else. Now not so perfect.
right. And then, of course, there's he's still putting tariffs on steel. He's still, I mean, there's a whole bunch of
It's a
exclusions.
mess.
Yeah, it's a mess. But there is a country on whom he did not put any tariffs, and that's why we're here today. And of course, I think anybody who watches this show can guess which country that is. That is the Russian Federation, led by his friend Vladimir Putin. Was not subjected to any tariffs. Now, he said it's because we don't do any trade. He said essentially we don't do any trade with Russia. That's false. We actually do trade with Russia, but we don't trade with Syria and we don't trade with Iran, and yet we put tariffs on them. So, Olga, I will turn it over to you. Any theories as to why?
I mean, he's owned by Russia.
Yeah.
um, Honestly, it was a very interesting because presumably they put this tariff, policy and this absurd formula, I mean, through ChatGPT in order to include the penguins on the herds on McDonald Island and exclude Russia. You would have to put do not include Russia or
Yep.
Belarus.
Yep.
So, I mean, this just shows you more intent that, they were planning not to include Russia. First of all, I can attest to the fact that we do trade with Russia
Of
since
course.
2022. I have been fighting not only Western components leaving US and making its way through China, Singapore, Dubai, um, to Russia's military complex in order to build weapons to kill Ukrainians. And, you know, that was just the behind the scenes. And then on top of it, I was dealing with lawmakers to try to stop the open business that we were doing. And if I remember correctly, we had like upwards of what, 300 billion? No,
Yeah. Sub
billion,
four. Yeah.
is
Something
it?
like that. Billion. Yep.
um last year with Russia in trade, despite sanctions, despite everything. The fact that he left Russia and Belarus, which is practically, annexed territory of Russia, um off the list is, it shows you more that his main objectives are to push Russia's foreign policy, their strategic goals, to protect them, protect their economy. At the same time, for anyone who said anything, he taxed Ukraine. I mean, tariffed Ukraine. So, I mean, you have Russia who's carrying out a genocidal, full scale invasion of Ukraine, bombing their infrastructure, bombing, civilians, and destroying everything. They have destroyed the economy. Yet, that didn't stop Trump from saying, we're not going to put tariffs on Ukraine because we're in the process of negotiating. So, I mean, it just goes back to more of the same that Trump, since he came back to office, that his main concerns are to prop up the Kremlin. That's it.
I mean, I keep going back to what we've talked about on this show before and what we've talked about offline before. I personally, and I know it's a issue of curiosity for a lot of people. I personally actually don't care anymore whether he is a Russian asset or not, because even if he were a Russian asset, he could not possibly be doing any more to help prop up Vladimir Putin than he's doing right now. So, was he turned by the KGB when he was there in the 80s? Was he turned in the, I don't even think it matters anymore. I mean, it matters for the history books, obviously, but
Yeah,
from a practical standpoint, Olga, I don't know if you agree with me. Like, what more short of pulling out of NATO, I guess is one thing he can do, which we'll get to in a moment. Um, what more can he possibly do? I don't know if he's sharing American intelligence with the Russians.
probably.
Wouldn't shock me. Jared Kushner kind of tried. We talked about that last week. Um, it's just incredible to me. And interestingly, he's putting these crazy tariffs on China. And what did the Ukrainians just say a few days ago? They caught, how many was it? Four Chinese nationals fighting on behalf of the Russians. So China, it's not just North Korea, it's now China that's
Yep.
fighting on behalf of the Russians. Like, if it's not obvious to everybody, and I think North Korea was also another country he did not put tariffs on because his
No.
good friend, because his good friend,
Yeah.
you know, Kim keeps sending him love letters, and so I guess that's
And again, to go back to my main point, whatever formula they used, whether it was ChatGPT, whether some idiot hand wrote everything
yeah,
down, the fact that you are targeting territory that holds only the U.S. base. So we're tariffing our U.S. base. You're targeting a territory that has zero inhabitants and just penguins, but you exclude Russia, Belarus, and North Korea. I mean, there's a specific thing. Again, if it went through
yeah,
ChatGPT, you would have to type, list every single country and territory in the globe minus Russia, Belarus,
Belarus,
and North Korea.
and those happen to be the three nations. As far as
Fighting.
I guess they knew last week, fighting against Ukraine. Now we know, according to the Ukrainians, that the Chinese are somehow involved in this as well. I don't know to which extent. I don't know if they're just mercenaries or they were sent there by Xi Jinping, or how it works. But nevertheless, there are a few Chinese
They were
nationals
captured.
that were
Hmm.
captured. And so, I don't know what more needs to be said. Like, this isn't crazy conspiracy
No,
paranoia. This isn't people going down weird rabbit holes. Like, it is right before our eyes. And to me, what is so clearly obvious and will probably happen before the end of this year is that we are going to abrogate our NATO agreements. Certainly, Pete Hegseth already talked about effectively pulling out of Article 5, which is the agreement that governed, which, by the way, let me explain what Article 5 is. Article 5 is the agreement in the NATO compact that effectively guarantees mutual defense, so that if somebody attacks one NATO country, the others come to their defense. The only time Article 5 has been invoked, and this is so important for people to know, I'm sure most of you do, is by the United States in Afghanistan. We were attacked in 9/11, and every country in NATO, little countries, and countries that were not in NATO, like Australia and New Zealand and Ukraine and others, went and fought for us in Afghanistan. So we have gotten more from NATO in some ways than NATO has gotten from us. Because as much money as everybody complains that we put into NATO, um, commensurate with other countries, those other countries actually have never been attacked and invoked Article 5, and American
Yep.
troops have never had to go fight on their behalf. That doesn't apply in the reverse. Their troops have had to fight on our behalf. So I say that because Pete Hegseth put out a memo I believe it was last week, and I wrote about this on Salty Politics in my Substack, and I know Olga, I'm sure you probably did too, but put out a memo which mirrored exactly what was in the Heritage Found. Well, we talked about this last week in the Heritage Foundation
Hmm.
document that effectively talked about the fact that we're no longer responsible for European security. That's, in other words, we are no longer really living up to our NATO commitments. And if that's the case, then I think by the end of this year, we're just officially out of NATO, which will be the biggest gift to Vladimir Putin, in addition to what's happening right now, which is with the bond markets, just so people understand. Also, the market jumped up yesterday on news of this trade deal irrationally. I think it's now down again, as far as I know, as of this morning. But the bond markets are signaling panic. People are fleeing into other safe haven assets like Germany's government bonds, which are kind of representative of the Eurozone's government bonds, because they don't think we're stable anymore. Our government is not
Yep.
stable anymore.
We're not.
What a gift to the Russians.
Yeah.
I mean, if you wanted to destroy, for all the money that they spent on their nuclear arsenal, for all the money that they spent trying to infiltrate the United States, the biggest gift that Vladimir Putin has gotten is in the last 75 days, or however you track this. Is it 75 days that he's been in office?
We're on 79 today.
79. So in the last 79 days, that's all it took. That is all it took.
Yep. To go back to your initial thoughts, I do think it is important. The reason I think it is important to find out what exactly happened with Trump is because the US media failed. And a lot of
100%.
people, to this day do not understand. And I would say probably if you stop 10 people in the street, eight would not know that Trump has ties to Russia going back to the Soviet Union. They
Oh,
wouldn't know. They wouldn't
I
know
would
the
say
history.
99.9% would know. Yeah.
Okay. So I think, and this is because of media failure, because the media should have laid this out instead of covering for Trump and covering for Russia. By not discussing this, a lot of people are left dumbfounded. I mean, for you and I, what happened when Trump ambushed Zelensky was, I mean, as clear as, the sun coming up in the morning. Like, this was going to happen. That this negotiation is bullshit, and that basically that Trump is going to do everything to help Russia. But we follow this. We know the history of this.
Mm.
If more people knew the history, there would be more outrage. And I personally would argue that if more people knew this, and the US government actually took actions to deal with this from Trump's first term, then he might have not even been back in power, because you're putting a Russian asset to the most powerful position. And you're right, there is nothing, I mean, nothing that could be done more to destroy America than what he is doing. And the people who are celebrating are the people in the Kremlin. This is, I mean, a Soviet KGB wet dream to have USAID dismantled, to have Voice of America dismantled, to have all democracies attacked, European allies attacked, NATO basically attacked, at least now rhetorically, and now we're going to start seeing actions. I mean, there's not one KGB operation that would have been this successful from what is happening right now. And I do think for the historical context, it is important for people to know why, in order to, understand this is just bigger than Trump waking up and saying, oh, yeah, Putin is a great guy and whatever. That this is much, much deeper. And the only way that we as a country can move forward is by dealing with the truth, not sweeping. And America has this, habit of taking the worst things that have happened and sweeping it under the rug, putting a temporary band aid until there's a hemorrhage. In Ukraine, we had a treasonous president who was under the direction of Russia, Yanukovych.
Yeah.
Ukrainians didn't hide that. They weren't embarrassed by it. They dealt with it. They held, granted, Yanukovych fled to Russia and is under their security protection, but there were trials, treason trials. They weren't scared to say, we're, an exceptionalist nation, and therefore we can't admit that this happened to us. And this, I think, is also important because if we survive this, we need to deal with, the root causes of this. So we don't get to the point. And America's exceptionalism has prevented that because heaven forbid we admit, that Russia maybe had one upon us by installing someone in 2016 into the White House. And now we are at a point that it is 2024. The majority of Americans, you're probably right, it is 99.9%, do not understand the seriousness of this, and as a result, our democracy is being dismantled. I mean, like, I don't even know what will be left. We will be able to rebuild. We have to get to that point. But I mean, we could have avoided all of this if both the media, educated people on the threats. The U.S. law enforcement and intelligence agency acted accordingly. I mean, Trump should have been prosecuted a long time ago. Forget 2016, the amount of money he laundered for the Russians in the 90s and the 2000s. He should have been prosecuted locally on a federal level. I mean, there were plenty of crimes, and we decided to look the other way, and then that led to 2016, and then we decided to look the other way under Biden, and now that led to what we're seeing now, which is basically the destruction of this country. That's unrecognizable. I mean, you and I come from a region, we know what it's like, what is, to have a regime surveil you and criticize, if you, heaven forbid, criticize, this regime, that you get labeled a terrorist and thrown, away into jail. We are seeing this happening right now. Right
Oh,
now, people are being disappeared across America right now. And I mean, this is, I could go on and on and on.
well, we should do a whole separate show on that,
Yeah.
and we will. But I will say to you, we've said this before, the biggest failure of the Biden administration, and I truly believe this. Everybody's talking about how everybody covered up Joe Biden's decline. Everybody's talking about how, Joe Biden didn't have a good message. Yeah, okay, all of that is true. But the biggest single failure to me is that Joe Biden decided that we needed to move on from Donald Trump. He called him the former guy. He wouldn't really talk about him. And the reality is that there is somebody in American intelligence, more than one person most likely, that has the full story on Donald Trump. They know it. And we, the American people, should have known it. It should have been exposed.
Yep.
And the fact that it wasn't because Joe Biden decided that we needed to move on as a nation is exactly what you're talking about. This notion that Americans are exceptional and we don't have, almost like what South Africa had, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I'm not talking about Nuremberg trials where people literally hang. I'm talking about a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that talks about the fact that we have had somebody in the Oval Office both for one term in 2016 to 2020 or 2017 to 2021, and again today, who is doing everything possible to harm the United States geopolitically, economically, patriotically, quite honestly, from a civil rights perspective, domestically, in every way. And the answer is the question, I guess, and I'd like to know the answer is why? Why? Because, you know, Trump's not stupid. He's not, I'm not suggesting he's like a Mensa member, but he's a shrewd guy. I mean, he's a survivor.
Yeah.
And you have to kind of be, street smart to be a survivor. And he's been a
Like Russian
survivor.
mafia.
Yeah, exactly. And and the question to me is for me is why were the American people not told when there was a huge opportunity over the last 4 years to do that, what exactly this was all about? I mean, it's like I don't know, the most obvious answer is probably the answer, which is the answer that we think that
Yeah.
he was somehow turned by the Russians. But I mean, he's not even hiding what he's doing, going all the
No.
way back to when he had, the Russian foreign minister in the Oval Office and no Americans there. When he had a private conversation with Vladimir Putin, nobody else was there in Helsinki, and he took the notes from the interpreter. And again, we keep talking about where's that interpreter? Why has nobody talked about what she knows?
Exactly.
Um, it's all there in front of us, and yet we're told to move on. And I swear to God, I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. I will not vote for any Democrat. I just will not do it. Who is not in a primary, who is not going to commit to a transparent truth and reconciliation commission about what the hell has gone on.
Yeah.
I'm not ready to, I don't want to
100%.
move on. I want answers.
100%, because as a country, we can't move forward. If, again, I believe we will survive, but, if we survive this, we can't move forward if we hide this away from the American people. Like, this needs to be, addressed. People need to understand what happened. And that's it. And I mean, we're seeing the repercussions, and the repercussions are, I mean, deadly. If there were, and we know. I mean, I remember after Ivana Trump died, the FBI declassified
Yeah,
files
her file.
showing she was under a counterintelligence investigation. Now, why was this not made aware to the people that a person running for U.S. president in 2015, that his wife was under a counterintelligence
While for
investigation?
the entire time they were married, when she would
Hmm.
travel, and again, people have to understand this, like Olga, you know this. When we've talked about this before, but it bears repeating. When you flee the Iron Curtain in the
You don't go
60s or
back.
70s, as I did, you just don't go back for visits with your family. You
No.
just don't. And yet, Ivana Trump was able to travel back and forth to visit her parents who were still living in what was then Czechoslovakia, bring her kids, bring her husband. It, it
It's
like, what are you talking about? I am here personally to tell you that when we left the Soviet Union in 1980 and I was 6 years old, my parents sat me down, and I was raised by my grandparents when we lived there. I spent weekends with my parents, but I was primarily raised by my grandparents. They were what was known then as refusnik Jews. They were not given a visa to leave, which was a very typical Russian thing to do, Soviet thing to do, which was to separate families. You'd leave the
mhm,
old people by themselves. You would tell their children, you're leaving your parents to die on their own. You're selfish, horrible human beings. You can go, but they have to stay. And that's what happened to us. My parents and I were able to leave. My grandparents had to stay. And I remember as a little girl being sat down by my mother and being told, I just want to prepare you that you will never see your grandparents again. And I have never forgotten that conversation. It's been 45 years, and I have never forgotten that conversation because you knew, even as a little
yeah,
kid, you knew that if you were lucky enough to leave, as Ivana Trump was, you could never go back.
yep.
Your family was effectively dead to you, and you were dead to them. If you were lucky, you would be able to write letters that were then read by the Soviet authorities and censored. If you were
And you
lucky,
couldn't communicate. And for the most part, everyone for the safety. My parents fled the Soviet
yeah,
Union and came here in 77, the beginning
right.
of 77. Same story. When you left, I was en route with them. When you left, you just said goodbye to your family. That's
That's
it.
it.
You did
And
not think about, a future collapse or future, reuniting. Only after the collapse did people start, and realize that the government had fell, did people start reaching back out
of
in
course,
92 to see who in their families even alive and to see how they can reconnect with them and who's where and what's happening and whatnot. But for that time during the Cold War, I mean, on both ends, you can reach out here back to the Soviet
yeah.
Union because here you would actually fall under a counterintelligence
I mean,
investigation
we would,
for
yeah, we would periodically, very sparsely, have phone calls, which were we knew were, and
monitored.
you could hear that they were monitored. They were monitored by the Soviets. I'm sure they were probably monitored by the Americans
Yep.
too. But I am sure your parents. I know that you were, an infant, but I am sure your parents remember, as I do,
Oh, yeah.
the last moments with your family in the Soviet Union before you had to get on that plane.
Yep.
It is truly like being at a funeral with people who are still alive. You
Yep.
know they're alive, but you know they're effectively never going to be in your life again. I mean, it is heartbreaking, and we don't need to dwell on it other than to say that this did not happen to one person, and her name is Ivana Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, like, uh,
And I can
why?
add something personal in my case on my mother's side, because the Soviet Union is so cruel. And my dad was Jewish, my mom was not. She was an ethnic Russian. My
Right.
dad is Ukrainian. Um, on my mother's side, they KGB forced my grandmother, as my mother was leaving, to try to set her up, in order to prevent her from leaving. So in that case, it was even more, devious that they used your family under a
Yeah.
gun to basically try, to carry out the state's orders. My parents left from Ukraine, from Kiev, via train through Czechoslovakia, and then, had to wait in Italy for their
Yeah.
papers before coming to the US. But I mean, it was like, the fact she traveled back and forth, I mean, that just speaks for it. And apparently, the FBI also thinks, this is not conspiracy because if they had her under counterintelligence, investigation, if you had the STB, which was the Czechoslovakia's intelligence services, under the control of the KGB headquarters in Prague, and they released files and declassified and showed a team of people who were on Ghana, who that her father was an informant reporting on U.S. politics, on Donald Trump, on everything. So I mean, this again, U.S. the FBI declassified this after her death. In I believe it was 2008 that the XTB files were opened and this was made public, you know. And anyway, to round this up, we will not move forward if we don't address
A
these things
hundred
because
percent.
this really, like, whether it's this or whether it's the insurrection, and I know Trump planned the insurrection. I mean, for God's sakes, we know what happened from reports from Steve Bannon having meetings, the
Yes.
night before in the hotel.
Yeah.
Why was the American public? Yes, we had the, January 7th report, but why was Trump shielded from it? We know that he planned this insurrection. Why can the American people not know the truth of what happened? And that
Because
he wasn't just, by accident, like it didn't start with him giving a speech. and saying, oh, yes, if you believe in your country or whatever he said, go to the Capitol. That's not where it started. It started months before. I would argue months before the even election, they
Yeah.
started planning for this possibility.
And, it's this infantilization that I think our leaders have and have always had, right? It's the same reason we really can't reckon with when I was growing up, you studied the Civil War. What was the Civil War about? Well, it was a war between the states and the South wanted to, the South wanted to be independent. And like nobody really went into the slavery thing too much, right? We still haven't really
No,
reckoned with the Civil War and the causes of it, and slavery and Jim Crow, which most people, I would venture, going to school now are not taught.
no.
Um, it's this crazy thing, and you nailed it, where we are exceptional, therefore we can't ever have anything taught to us or told to us that would make us seem that we're not exceptional, including the fact that we have had a president in the Oval Office who very likely is either a willing Russian asset or a useful idiot. But whatever he is, I lean towards the former. But whatever he is, somebody knows. And by the way, going back to your thing about Ivana Trump and the fact that we know that this, I mean, this part is not just declassified, but has been widely reported that the KGB did try to turn him in the 80s. Now, think about this, everything you know about Donald Trump, everything you know about him. If you have, on the one hand, a pile of money, and on the other hand, patriotism, which do you think Donald Trump would choose? I mean, what aspect of Donald Trump do you think would ever say to anybody offering him a bailout at a time when he's going bankrupt? His businesses are collapsing. He's selling the Plaza Hotel, which was his pride and joy. Trump Air is bankrupt. The yacht is taken away. The casinos are going bankrupt in Atlantic City, three of them. Three other businesses are going bankrupt. At which point do you think Donald Trump says, oh, you know what? I know you're coming to me with a huge bailout, but you know what? I'm just not going to do that to the country that I love. Give me a break,
He
right?
doesn't even love this country.
Yeah.
He never did. Yeah, no. I mean, 100%. Now, to move on to NATO.
Yes.
Um, Trump can't, as with everything, just dismantle NATO or remove US from, the alliance. It still does have to go through Congress,
Yeah.
and we see this, with the agencies, USAID and others, where they can't fully be shuttered, but they can basically be gutted and left as a
Yeah.
shell.
Yeah.
So,
Different.
technically, Congress has the power, to stop USAID or Global America, Voice of America, global media.
Yeah.
Um, but, they're not going to do it. So what does Trump do? He just fires everyone, leaves one person there. Same thing with NATO. I mean, Congress will never actually have a vote to remove US officially, but Trump can put, basically abandon NATO. And with this, between the attacks, on the rhetoric on Canada, on Greenland, Greenland covered by NATO, Canada, a NATO founder, between the hatred that he has been spewing towards NATO and towards Europe. I mean, these are our allies. I mean,
Oh, I mean, he treats Europe like they're the redheaded stepchild.
yeah,
Like they're so weak and irrelevant that it's beneath him to even deal with them.
yep. Yep. Yeah, and I mean these are alliances that have kept the world stable for the most part, since World War II. So now the new reports are that Trump is considering pulling 10,000 soldiers out of Eastern Europe. Now, after Russia launched a full-scale invasion, Biden, basically relocated U.S. military and put soldiers into Poland, into Romania, and basically to secure the eastern flank. Now, and he put 20,000 soldiers. So now there are reports that Hegseth is planning to remove half of that, 10,000 soldiers at a time that Russia is escalating. I mean, Trump's ceasefire. sham got overshadowed with the tariffs. But I mean, Russia has been killing civilians every single day.
Yep.
They just bombed a playground, over the weekend in Zelensky's hometown, killing children,
Yep.
9 children in a playground. I mean, images
Yeah.
of parents
In
with
Kyiv.
their
Yep.
dead children in tears. So as Russia's escalating, you have Trump now, you know, pulling planning to pull 10,000 soldiers. And that's not the end of it, because there are talks also of pulling US soldiers out of Germany and basically, again, gutting this alliance on our end and just leaving Europe to its own. And this is extremely dangerous, because I mean, our troops based in Europe have been not only, you know, needed for European security, but for US national security. And the fact that we are doing everything to, one, escalate. Trump keeps talking about World War III. He is the one, between his tariffs and his moves, who will start World War III, who will start World War III. And he's doing everything basically to put Europe into a position that you have Russian tanks and drones and missiles falling across European capitals. And I mean, again, something not mentioned in the media. You would think this is kind of important, if they're planning to cut 10,000 troops. And there was a hearing where one of the top military leaders warned about this and how dangerous this would be. And maybe even the news came from him during the hearing, which we'll see if he even survives. Because the hearing happened the other day.
Yeah.
My feeling is that he'll probably be fired for, actually speaking out and telling the truth.
Well, look, this is what we talked about earlier. He's going to start pulling troops out of Eastern Europe. And then he's going to, they just fired, first of all, didn't they say that they want NATO command to no longer be somebody in the United States, but somebody else?
Yeah.
Like,
And they just fired the woman who
right,
was in charge of this. Yep.
right. So,
And the purge.
yeah. So, look, it's exactly as you said. They can't get rid of it, but they're going to hollow it out. And
Hmm.
they're going to defund, um, or they're going to sequester the funding, even if Congress appropriates the funding, which is unconstitutional, but yet that's what they do.
Hmm.
Um, and um, and then it's going to go to the Supreme Court, and probably the court's going to say, well, foreign policy is the purview of the president or the executive, so we're going to let him do that. And that will be it. I mean, that will be it. And what that will mean effectively is just a question of whether, once Putin is done with Ukraine, whether he moves on Poland or the Baltics next, all of which are NATO countries. And the real question is probably, I don't even know. I can't even guess. Um, and the real question is how fast every single Trump person is going to say, well, we're not going to go die for them, right? I mean, like, why would we die
Hmm.
for little Lithuania? Why would we die? I mean, we can't even put Latvia on the map. Again, these are all countries who went to Afghanistan for us, right? They weren't attacked in 9/11. We were just a couple miles from where I'm sitting right now, a couple miles from where Olga's sitting right now. Certainly, you know, nobody in Vilnius got attacked by Osama bin
No,
Laden.
nope.
And yet their
They
soldiers went
died
and
for
died,
us.
and they died for us. And the answer is going to be, well, I mean, this is crazy. For Poland, like, why would we die for Poland?
Yep.
Because every time Poland's attacked, it doesn't stop at Poland. Know your history, right? But yet they're just going to roll through. I mean, it's going to be, and again, Trump is not very good at being subtle. Trump is not very good at being secretive. He does tell you what's going on if you just pay attention. It's just the media does not pay attention to this. I mean, they will write a story that this woman got fired, or they'll write a story that, 10,000 troops are being pulled, but they won't tell you what that means.
Yep.
Because God forbid Trump is going to push back at them, or God forbid somebody's going to think they're biased. It's not bias. to tell you what this means. This means that NATO is on the chopping block. It just is. And this is what Trump does. And I wrote a whole thing about this today. He's social. I know, Ola, you used the word socialized earlier. It's true. He socializes people to certain ideas so that when he doubles down on this, the boiling frog theory, which is what I said today, right? You put the frog in the pot in tepid water, and then you turn on the pot, and the frog is swimming around in warm water. And by the time it starts boiling, the frog doesn't realize it's dead.
Mhm.
And that's what happens each and every time. I mean, he talks about it with NATO. Okay, he pulled out 10,000 troops. Well, all right. Well, he fired this NATO commander. Okay. Hegseth is saying that we're not going to worry about the European continent. Europe has to worry about itself. We're exclusively focused, you know, on the Taiwan Strait. Fine, that I understand, but we're also exclusively focused on our own Western sphere of influence, including Cape Horn, which is between Chile and Antarctica. Okay, and Greenland, and the Panama Canal. All right, so now we're talking about effectively having another Monroe Doctrine. It doesn't matter. The point is, Europe is on its own. NATO is on its own. The former Soviet republics who died for us are on their own. And yet nobody's connecting the dots in the media to say, don't you understand what is happening? He's effectively handing over to the successor of the Soviet Union everything that the Soviets tried to do since 1945.
Yep.
Since the day that Churchill warned Stalin, stop messing around with Poland because the Catholic Church is going to be upset with you because obviously Poland is 99.9% Catholic, to which Joseph Stalin said, well, how many divisions does the Pope have? And that's okay. And that has been the plan since then, since Yalta, since Potsdam. We
Mhm.
don't need to go down, our history books here, other than to say it predates that. Russian expansion predates that.
Oh,
The modern Russia is conquered territory for a lot of it. St. Petersburg is conquered territory, it used to be Swedish. I'm not suggesting to give it back to Sweden, it's been a long time. But understand that between Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, a lot of land was taken from a lot of people and turned into what is today modern Russia. And this is
and
it's
this is the
always
mentality,
it's the
you
yes,
know.
it has always been so. It has always been so. And the
This is
bowl
what's important to point out. It is the mentality, and sorry to cut you off,
no, no, you're
but
right. That's where I was
this
getting.
is the mentality because there was a lot of expansionism in the 1700s, the 1800s. I mean, you can go back,
Mhm.
centuries for this, but for the most part, everyone kind of, accepted their borders over the past century and moved on and looked to see how they can develop their nations and and just to be prosperous, be a
Yeah.
prosperous country. But with Russia, I mean, you are indoctrinated to the point that you are superior to all mankind, and that it is the Russian right for imperialism, regardless how bloody it is. So while, Estonia, Lithuania, and every country has moved on and is trying, you know, to grow their country economically and to have stability and democracy, Russia teaches you that it is your right as a Russian, one, to be superior to everyone. And I grew up in a Russian community, and I can tell you that no matter if they are here 20 years. They look down on Americans. I mean, the fact that Maricosa, I mean, is the most commonly used term, which basically is like these idiot Americans.
Yeah.
So they look down on Americans, and it is the one, and this is because of the indoctrination by the state. No matter if they leave the state, for the most part, it's very rarely that it happens, but for the most part, they will still think that they are better and that the US is collapsing, even as they're sitting here and even collecting welfare and Medicaid. They will still sit here and push, and mock the Americans and
And
how
they're all
wonderful
Trump
Putin.
voters, by the way.
Yeah, and how wonderful Putin is. And oh, yeah, we're not stopping with Ukraine. We have to take back this and this and this and this. You could be out of that system for 20 years and you still have the mentality instead of worrying about this, about what Russia's going to conquer next. And that just goes back to this is, you know, like I said, the world got to, territory got grabbed by many over the centuries. But for the most part, the modern world, sits and focuses on like, bullshit, social media, this, that,
Yeah.
birthday parties, normal things. And here you have, if you go back, you know, to Russia, I mean, from kindergarten, they are indoctrinating you, and they just again reintroduced more indoctrination, patriotism, courses, and it's starting from kindergarten that you are superior and you deserve to own all territory because everything belongs to Russia.
I will tell you a question that I asked my grandmother when I was about 4, just to show you how early the indoctrination begins, and I'm not joking, and it's actually kind of a joke in my family because it happened. I literally came home and I asked my grandmother, and I was not even in kindergarten yet, I was, like, in preschool. It's called kindergarten in Russia, the whole thing, but it was really preschool age, like, I think I was 4 or 5.
Yeah, they're ahead
And
in schooling.
yeah, and I asked my grandmother, "What is more important, bread or Lenin?" Vladimir Lenin. I mean, the founder of the Soviet Union, who had been long dead by the time I asked this question. And my grandmother said, I think very diplomatically, because of course you couldn't speak freely. Well, bread's really important. You eat it every day. You need it to survive because there wasn't much food. You actually just ate bread. And I said, "Oh no, no, I think you're wrong. I think Lenin's much more important than bread." I was 4 or 5. I mean, understand how early this begins. But I want to go back to something you said, because that Russian mentality is very similar to Trump's mentality. On the one hand, he's superior to everybody. On the other hand, he's constantly under attack, and there's a sense of victimization. And
Yes,
the and,
yes,
and the
yes, yes,
Russians are very much like that, right? We're superior
yes.
to everybody, but everybody wants to get us. So we have to get
Hmm.
them first, because if we don't get them first, they're going to come for us, right? It's not
Yes.
that we're going to get it's Ukraine is a bunch of Nazis, so that if we don't get Ukraine, they're going to Nazify us. Like,
And before you continue, I'll go
yeah,
right into the next topic.
yeah.
Nazis. Everyone remember Nazis. Go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, that's why I think we can move on to the I
Yeah.
think we can move on to the Nazis now, but that's my whole point. The point is that, that it is truly, truly fascinating how Trump has so much in common. The golds, the glitz, anybody go check out what a Russian Orthodox church looks like, right? It
Or
is
a
the most
Russian
gaudy.
cafe.
Or a Russian cafe. It's so Trumpy, it's so gaudy, it's so much gold-plated bullshit. And like I can just imagine Trump going to Moscow for the first time and being like, "Oh my god, I'm home. Like these people speak my language. This architecture speaks my language. The ambiance here speaks my language." And it's no one it's just him. It's gaudy, it's whatever. I mean, I'm sorry for, anybody here who might be offended who's Russian, but it is true that it's not particularly
It is.
austere.
It's
Yeah.
so gaudy because just before we move on, I looked. Occasionally I go through to kill my brain.
Right.
Go through the Russian rag magazines. Like the People magazine and
Yeah,
those
yeah.
type Star magazines, and I look at the houses of the oligarchs, and I mean literally, it is so tasteless
Yeah.
because you didn't have money, and then when you do have money you have to have it all, and like one
You have to
house, I'm
show
not
everybody that you
kidding.
have it. You have to
Yeah,
show everybody you have it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's hence why you see like not to, but hey, everything has to be labeled Chanel, Versace,
Yeah,
Gucci, and
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
But these oligarch houses, I mean, it is something like of a mind fuck. You walk in, and it is literally 1 minute you're in a zebra room, and everything is just zebra and loud and this. Then the next room you walk into, and it's like Italy, and it's like they pull 17 like you know, different decorating things to throw into one
Yeah.
house because they have to show that we have this from here and that from there. And it's the gaudiest thing. And I'm like, oh my God. But yeah, that victimization is extremely, I've also spoken about that because it is so true. It's like they will, invade a country, and then the minute someone opens their mouth, oh, Russophobia, Russophobia.
Oh,
Oh,
I've
this
been
is,
accused of Russophobia
I've
so
been
much.
accused.
It's like their go-to. Like you criticize Putin, oh, we've got Russophobia. No,
Yep.
actually, I don't have Russophobia. It's a country I come from. I take a lot of pride in its literature. I take a lot of pride in its music. I take a lot of pride in its culture, some of it. I don't take a lot of pride in its government and what it's done to its people for the last, I don't know, ever in its whole
And
history.
luckily,
They've never had a good government.
luckily with my family, the hatred towards the Soviet Union is so strong that
Mine too.
when we came here, like I really, even though I grew up in the community, like I really dealt with nothing. Like it was like my parents tried to shield me from
Right.
that indoctrination from Russian TV, Russian radio, from everything. So thank God that's why
My
I'm somewhat
yeah.
normal. Now moving
My
back
parents
onto.
just yeah,
Uh-huh.
my parents just to finish up, then we'll move on to the Nazis. My parents specifically did not go to Brooklyn where a lot of the Russian, community was settling because they didn't want to be part of that, because they so hated the Soviet Union, they didn't want to deal with any like they were finished. The only
Yeah.
Russian influence we really had was we spoke Russian at home, we still do, because they smartly understood that it was a language that I needed to keep. Plus their English never got that great. But but yeah, they certainly wanted no part of that for that very reason, right? But that's not the case. I think a lot of Russians who came here, well, I think there were different level waves of immigration, right? Your wave of immigration with your parents, my
Mine
wave of
got thrown
immigration.
in there. We had
Yeah,
no choice.
they came for ideological reasons. They hated the Soviet Union. I think 10 years later, people started to come here because they wanted to get rich. And that's a big
Yeah.
difference. That's a big difference between people who
And mine,
came
my
here.
dad was persecuted because he was under KGB monitoring, and I mean it was just nonstop, relentless,
Right.
because he was part of an underground university movement in Kiev. You know, uh, basically questioning, not even challenging,
Yeah.
questioning what is communism, is this the right system, and this is enough to
Oh,
have the KGB throw you in jail
yeah.
every other day. And I mean, what my parents went through their last years, I mean, they're lucky they made it
I'm
here,
surprised
and
they
then
got
I'm
out.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
All right, let's talk about Nazis. Go ahead.
so now back to Nazis. So there was a report by the Guardian, and again, everything that we discussed, I mean, for the most part, like the main topic stories will be in our show notes with links to it. There's a US based Nazi group called the Base. The founder of this base is basically, I mean, I've always seen him as a Russian asset, and I've always seen this, the base, the group, as a Russian operation. But he, started this group, this Nazi group in US, eventually fled and lives in St. Petersburg. Um, the base has cells all around the world. It's a domestic terrorist group. They had have sent people, and they're very connected with the neo Nazis in Germany and other, Nazi groups across Europe. It's like I said, a global group that has cells based in U.S. They've sent a lot of their members to training over the past decade to St. Petersburg, to mercenary camps to train,
Yeah.
basically Prigozhin type camps from Wagner Group. Um, and like I said, Ronaldo, who is the founder, is living already for a while. He escaped and is living in St. Petersburg. Well, this group has now put out calls um for its operatives to carry out terrorist attacks in Ukraine against critical infrastructure and to carry out targeted assassinations. Now, this group was kept in check in US because the FBI specifically, I mean, they've had it for a long time, but they
Yeah.
kind of ramped up their operations after January 7th to look at domestic terrorist groups. Under Trump, all this task force to monitor the far right, and all the extremist groups, whether even they support him or not. I mean, there were, other groups who are just a nihilist and want the government toppled. You know, Under him, these units basically got shifted over to look at immigration. So now you have this U.S. Nazi group being used by Russia to basically call for assassinations and terrorist attacks against infrastructure and across Ukraine. The goal to destabilize, and again, this is very key to remember. This is a group under the control of Russia, a Nazi group. And their goal for this timing is to destabilize Ukraine and ceasefire talks. So, as Trump sells America, the bullshit that Russia wants to stop this war, Russia is now using their neo Nazi group in the United States to try to sabotage the ceasefire talks. So this is extremely important, and now we don't have a functioning FBI because the FBI is, going after protesters and immigrants, and soon to be all of us. So now this group can operate freely. And I mean, this is something, again, the media should have mentioned this. It's kind of important that there's a Nazi group in US that has put out a call for attacks in Ukraine and assassinations, and that it is under the control of Russia. Like I said, I personally believe that Russia is the one who created this group because Russia has a lot of Nazi groups, again, going back to the Soviet days. Putin, while he was serving in Dresden in the 80s, he, was a handler to a neo Nazi who he sent into West Germany in order to recruit more neo Nazis. So for Russia, who claims that they're denazifying Ukraine, I mean, that just shows you more and more that Russia is, behind it. I
Well,
mean, supporting these Nazi groups. Russia
mhm.
also ran, interestingly enough, there used to be a forum online. It shut down in 2017, and it basically connected all the Nazi groups across the globe on this forum. It was like a Facebook for Nazis. Um, of course, the person who started this forum was a Russian intelligence person living in Moscow. So they're the ones who started this, and that is their goal to, basically uh, divide and polarize countries, and using the far right extremists and Nazis and white supremacists, is part of their goal to further polarized divide, and this is why we see them funding far right and white supremacist political parties, creating parties across Europe with white supremacists funding these neo-Nazi operations and whatnot. So I'm sure not that many people have heard about this because it definitely wasn't mentioned on any news program. But this is an important thing to keep an eye on because right now Russia is using it for Ukraine. Russia can easily shift it over to use it for terrorist attacks in the US.
See, this is the part that, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, this is the part where I think the United States media has largely failed. Like, this was in The Guardian, which, by the way, is a British outlet. It is not
Yep,
American. This is deeply important. And it's not deeply important in isolation, as I think if American media were to write about it, they would write about this as an isolated story that's not connected to other stories.
yep,
And that I think is the problem. All of these stories pop up in isolation once and then never to be mentioned again. Um, Much like I go back to about a month ago, we talked about this when that ship crashed off the coast of Britain
yep,
into that Portuguese ship that was manned by a Russian captain, where half the crew was Russian, rammed into an American ship carrying fuel for our soldiers abroad, our military abroad. The American ship blew up. Um, one service person and one sailor on that ship, I believe, died, or maybe in the Portuguese ship, but somebody died off the coast of England. And lots of questions, lots of questions. Um, no answers from the media, which has just completely dropped the story. Like, it happened. Let's all move on. But again, it took us to connect the piece that just a few days before that, the Brits apprehended a Russian sub that was cutting cords in that exact location in the North Sea. Like, all of this is connected, or maybe it's
Mhm.
not connected, but
It's
surely,
part of
yeah,
operation.
yeah, but surely the New York Times or the Financial Times over in Britain or the Wall Street Journal. I'm not gonna, the Washington Post is dead, so we're not going to talk about that. But I mean, CNN with all of its global resources, surely somebody has the will to connect all of these dots and to stay on these stories. It should not be Julie and Olga sitting every week talking about this or putting this out. I mean, I'm glad we are, but the reality is like this is the failure of the legacy media, and this is why we find ourselves where we are today. We live in an, and forgive me for saying this because I know people. I'm not saying this glibly. We live in an ADHD society where we can't. We there's an attention deficit to flitting from one issue to the other without really focusing on the larger picture of what's happening.
Can I just add, everyone says that Trump, is chaotic and whatever. And I had written an article and I had warned about this because I've
Yeah,
seen this, tactic. This is strategic chaos,
100%.
specifically for the fact that we are in a society where people can't absorb more than a 60-second video, or a tweet, and this is why you see him flooding the zone with so much breaking
Yeah,
news that the media just like moves on. I mean, I was personally shocked that Signalgate was a 4-day story. I expected it to be done by like that night.
and it's
And
done.
then, and
Done.
yeah, it's done now. But I mean, the fact that he even lasted 4 days is,
Yeah.
but back to your point, I mean, these are very important issues. And if, for me personally, if Russia is using a US neo-Nazi group and we have no FBI monitoring it to direct attacks in Ukraine, I mean, they could be doing the same thing in US when they need to do Trump a favor, and destabilize US and then blame it on, Antifa or whatever. So,
Of
I mean,
course.
this is something
Of
that we
course.
need to really monitor and get attention to.
And, the United States, this is where we live today. We live in an unstable society because we are governed by an unstable man. So that's the largest picture of all, is that, you know, I've said this before. I said this yesterday to somebody. We've all had friends in our lives who are really fun, but then we realize they're kind of nuts, and then we realize they're kind of toxic, and then we realize there's so much goddamn drama that we can't have them in our lives anymore because the drama inflicts it starts to inflict pain on us, right? Like it starts
Yep,
to inflict like after a while you're like, okay, this used to be fun, but now there's too much drama and I just can't deal with it anymore. I got to cut it out of my life. Like we've
yep.
all lost I guarantee you everybody listening today has had a friend like that in their life that they've had to make the reluctant decision to say, I just have to cut them out
Enough.
of my life. Like enough. I just can't have this kind of drama in my life. That's our president. That's our president. Like the
We can't
constant
even
drama.
cut him out of our
But
lives.
we can't cut him out of our lives. And to people who are listening from abroad, this is where we find ourselves. And pretty soon, we're going to be like the Venezuelans who are going to be fleeing to your countries asking for asylum. Some of us. Like, I can't believe that in my life I might have to do this a second time. But the reality,
I
but the reality is that that's where we find ourselves right now. He's that crazy friend who constantly brings the drama, and you're like, I can't. This is just impacting my life too much. But you can't get him out. You cannot get him out. And he keeps inflicting himself and like all those friends who like they have to escalate the drama constantly because they need the attention. He's going to
Mhm.
constantly escalate the drama because he needs more and more attention. And every aspect of this country, from the economy. tanked. I mean, I don't care if he backs off on all of these tariffs, the markets might go up for a while, but nowhere in the world are investors going to say the United States is stable enough for us to have long-term investments, for us to buy 10-year, 20-year treasury bonds, or however long these treasury but long-term treasury bonds are. And the reason for that is because we had an experiment, it failed in 2020, and then we brought it back. So how are we ever going to be trusted not to bring the psychosis back again, even when he's gone? Like,
That's
that
why I
trust is
say
gone.
it'll take us literally, I don't even know if you and I will be alive, sadly,
I
but
don't
it'll
know.
take, lots of election cycles and, the power changing from Republicans to Democrats to Republicans to Democrats with a stable foreign policy. Because what this is, I call it a ping pong.
Of
Like,
course,
depending who's in
of
office,
course.
this is what we think. Today, NATO is wonderful. Tomorrow, NATO needs to be destroyed. Today, Russia is rightfully so the enemy and the aggressor. Tomorrow, Russia is my bestie, and I love Russia, and we have to, rehabilitate it and like bring it back from the dead and make sure that Russia is the superpower in the world. And
Yeah,
that's it. Before we wrap up, let's take a few minutes. I want you to discuss your very important article because, again, the media has skipped right over it. And Trump did, in his ramblings, and not the first time, mention about sending American criminals to the El Salvadoran
yeah,
prisons. And I just want you to touch quickly on the article. I recommend everybody read
thank
this. And
you.
then I want to talk about Trump's military parade, and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you and I are gonna talk much more about this, we're gonna do a special Substack just on this next week because it's so important. But,
Mhm.
and thank you for mentioning that article, if anybody wants to go to my Substack, Salty Politics, and read the whole thing, please do.
It's
Actually,
excellent, and you
yeah.
need to read it.
Thank you. And more importantly, after you read it, please, 202-224-3121 is the Capitol Hill switchboard. Please call your member of Congress. Please call your senators and talk about this because by the time we're done talking about it, if our leaders don't take action, if we don't protest this right now, it will be too late. So look, Trump on Sunday said on Air Force One very blithely that the notion of sending American citizens to CCOT, which is that hellhole gulag in El Salvador, is an idea that had merit, and I quote, I love it. If
Hmm.
it's, and he said, if it's legal, I love the idea. Okay. But these would be just violent repeat offenders. That's what he said. That's what he would send to CCOT.
Hmm.
Carolyn Levitt, his press secretary, was asked about this on, I believe, Tuesday at her briefing, and she said, "Yes, yes, yes. We've talked about this numerous times publicly. Well, actually, it only been one time. We've talked about this numerous times privately, which should concern the hell out of all of us. And yes, of course, we this is something we would love to we want to do with American citizens if it's legal. We don't know if it's legal. Okay, let me just break this down very quickly for
Mind
everyone.
you, they're defining what legal
They're
and
they're
illegal
defining
is.
what a violent repeat offender is. Now, they're going to define a violent repeat offender as somebody who goes and protests outside Tesla, a Tesla showroom, or goes and protests down Broadway or Fifth Avenue against the Trump administration, or just somebody, as I said, you could be hanging out as a mother on a playground talking to another mom, and you could be trashing Trump, and she can denounce you, and suddenly somebody's going to knock on your door, and you're going to be disappeared because this is not an administration that believes in due process. They're going to send you there first, and then maybe it'll go to the courts, and then maybe John Roberts might one day wake up and say, maybe we shouldn't do this, but most likely it's going to take years to work through the process. So I just want people to understand there are 238 Venezuelans who were rendered, and not just Venezuelans, but men who were rendered to the CCOT prison in El Salvador. Let me just quickly describe what that prison looks like so you understand where he wants to send American citizens. He wants to send American citizens to prison where you are in your cage for 23 and a half hours of the day. For the other 30 minutes, you are allowed to walk in the hallway to either go to Bible study or to do exercise in the hallway. You never see sunlight. If you have to go to solitary confinement, you're there for up to 15 days. It is you're below ground, 2 stories below ground, and then there is a little hole in the ceiling, a tiny little hole like this that releases one ray of sunlight that comes down to you. The rest of you is in pitch black darkness. None of this is constitutional. Understand, you never go outside, you never see daylight. None of this is constitutional. And yet he wants to send not just these poor men, who 75% of whom I think 60 Minutes of investigation have zero
Yes.
criminal record. The others have a criminal record.
Heartbreaking.
That's like,
Heartbreaking. I
yeah,
keep watching the
yeah,
stories of the wives. I'm sorry, but
it's
I keep
awful. Some of
watching.
whom just, yeah, it's awful. But listen, you want to talk about cruel and unusual punishment? I think you'd rather commit suicide than be in a place like that for the rest of your life. And yet, this is the place where Donald Trump wants to send you. This is a level of torture that I think we have not seen since like the Doges in the Venetian Republic. Like
Or
this,
Russia.
I mean,
Russia does this.
or Russia. I mean, Russia. At least you're outside doing hard labor. You're
Yeah,
not allowed to
actually,
work
yeah.
here.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to work here. You're not allowed to communicate with anybody. You're not allowed. Your family and friends cannot contact you. At least in Russia, you
Yeah.
could, I guess, get letters.
Yeah, yeah, true, true.
Um, which is not to say that the gulag in Russia is any good, but this is what I'm talking about. This
Yeah,
is
it's a
what he
country
wants to
club.
do. And for more horrible details, please go to my Substack, Salty Politics, and read this article. I wrote it a few days ago. But it is terrifying, and I want people to understand that this is all happening now. This is what Trump does. He socializes us, right? Like he says it kind of offhand on Air Force One
Hmm.
on his way to, back from Mar-a-Lago, wherever the hell he was, on his way from hanging out with the Saudis instead of receiving 4 dead American troops from Lithuania who arrived at Dover Air Force Base in coffins. He was busy golfing with the Saudis, um, and making money off of,
$1 million per
yeah,
head dinner
yeah,
as the
yeah, in Mar-a-Lago.
economy and stock market are
Yep.
crashing.
Um,
But hey, $1 million.
so he says this offhand. Nobody really picks it up. And then Carolyn Levitt does what they always do. Oh, we've talked about this many times before. Like nothing to see here. This is the socialization. This is what
Yes.
I wrote about this today. This is the boiling frog theory, right? We're
Hmm.
socializing people. Oh, well, wait a second. We're just going to turn up the heat a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more until the pot is boiling. But you don't know that because you're dead. And again, um, I don't see Chuck Schumer or Hakeem Jeffries. I mean, this is fucking terrifying. I'm sorry to my dad if he's
It
watching. I
is.
don't care, but but
It
but like, where are where is the minority leader of the United States Senate, my senator, your senator, Olga, Chuck Schumer? Where is Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader, the House Democratic leader? Where are they standing up and bringing attention to this? Where is the media? Like, yes, there was a lot of outrage on this. I believe it was yesterday when people kind of woke up to it, but then it was gone by today because the markets crashed and tariffs. And we have to write about new
So it
things
was
and
a
yada yada.
minute outrage. I mean,
Yeah,
really.
I mean, this is almost bigger than Signalgate, you guys. Actually, it is bigger than Signalgate.
Yeah.
It's bigger than anything else. He's talking about sending American citizens to a foreign gulag where our Constitution does not apply. Our protections do not apply. We will be subject to Salvadorian laws, which I have not reviewed, but I believe they don't have the same equal protection under the law that we do. And then he's going to say to people who are still here, you could go sort it out on behalf of your friends and family. They will be terrified to do that. Listen, I am positive you and I have never talked about this. And by the way, if you think the Constitution is going to protect you, I also wrote this in my column. In 1937 or 36 or 37, Joseph Stalin put out a constitution on behalf of the Soviet Union that's beautiful. Right to assembly, free speech. You couldn't ask for more, equal rights for women, like all of it. You couldn't ask for a better constitution. That same year, the Great Terror began. That same year, the roundups, which had been happening before, exponentially increased. At least a
Millions
million,
executed, sent to
millions
gulags,
executed, sent to the gulags. The people who came back from the gulags, like my grandfather, came back broken people physically. I mean,
and
uh,
mentally.
and mentally. So I just want people to understand that the Constitution is only as good as everybody following it. He is not following it. And for the life of me, I don't understand where the outrage is. And if you're watching this from abroad, I'm sure your head is exploding because you've always, I think, probably always thought of the United States, as we all did, as this haven of free speech, as this haven of legal protection. We've got more lawyers than any other country for a reason. No more, no more, because the laws are not something that he cares about.
No. I laugh because I remember after he came back and day one, literally hour one, started
Mm.
signing away all these illegal executive orders. You had all the institutionalists who are making their rounds always on CNN and MSNBC and whatever. Oh, well, no, he's not going to be able to do that. That is illegal. Oh, this is illegal and whatever. And I'm sitting and shaking my head with my primitive thinking. And I'm like, do they not fucking understand what a
No, they
dictator
don't.
is?
I've
The
had
same
no.
people who kept repeating the word. And this again goes back to my point that I always make. The same people who easily say Trump wants to be a dictator they don't comprehend what a dictator means because they've never
They've never
experienced it.
experienced it.
And unless you come from a family that has experienced it, it can roll out of your mouth, but you can't fully grasp it because your Western mentality cannot allow you to think of it. And when they say this was illegal and this is illegal and that's going to be illegal, and I'm like, he's a fucking dictator. Dictators write their own laws. I mean,
A-
it
And
could be
and
illegal, and then what? And then what?
and then what? And then what?
And
And
even if the Supreme Court doesn't side with him, what? Someone is going to go, is the Supreme Court going to send who to do what?
well, again, it goes back to what I've always said about John Roberts. To paraphrase Joseph Stalin, how many divisions does John Roberts have? He's going to send federal marshals to arrest Donald Trump. First of all, he's given him immunity from criminal prosecution. Congratulations, John Roberts. Second, this court is so terrified of having that ultimate battle with Trump. They are so fucking scared of ruling against Trump and forcing him to defy them and their legitimacy that they're ruling in his behalf purely to prevent that from happening.
And even if they rule against him, every agency is under his control with
Yeah,
his loyalists,
the federal marshals work for Pam
extremists.
Bondi. Yep, the
Yeah.
federal marshals work for Pam Bondi.
And
So
I don't know if you saw the federal marshals, which I'll include this story because I think this also goes back to this. And like Julie said, we're going to have a more
yeah,
detailed live on this. But the federal marshals last week sent federal marshal agents to a woman who was fired for refusing to lift, the gun restrictions on Mel Gibson to her house to intimidate her and prevent her from testifying in Congress. She wasn't home. Her teenage daughter was home. I'm like, what in the fuck? This is what happens in Russia when you have armed thugs showing up to your door to send a message with a letter that you are not allowed to testify on what happened and why you resigned. She ended up testifying and said, I'm not going to be intimidated. But the bottom line, are these the people who are going to go and pick up Trump?
they're going after Miles Taylor for
Yeah.
being a whistleblower and Chris Krebs for saying these are two Republicans who worked in his first administration for saying that this election in 2020 was not stolen. I mean,
With secure, yeah.
he signed it was secure. He signed an executive order yesterday directing Pam Bondi to investigate people in his own first administration. I mean, and do we really think she's not going to do it? The
Of
same
course
woman who
she will. And this
testified. I
goes
mean,
back to
of course,
Russia. Same thing, same playbook, different country. Shouldn't be happening in America. And that's it. But
yeah.
yeah, I recommend everyone read
Thank you.
this piece because it is extremely important. You know, I rather be on the side of sounding the alarm, like everyone wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. This is dangerous. This is
Yeah.
not a joke. And nothing happened, than for people to be sleeping and then one day their family members or kids are disappearing and being sent to
Guys,
El Salvador. And then you have to go and navigate a legal system where no one wants to represent you because Trump is attacking all the lawyers who he challenge him or might potentially down the line challenge him. So Please,
don't
everyone.
be a frog. Do not get in that pot.
No,
That's what
no,
he's
no,
trying
no.
to do.
And we need
Don't
to push back because it works. It's been working. We need to keep calling, keep showing up to town halls. I honestly want to organize one for my congresswoman who's non-existent here,
yeah.
but we need to keep pushing back because it is working. It's slowing things down, and we need to do it. And I just want to wrap up quickly with my article that on as the market was crashing, another red flag
Yep.
that I saw that I actually was screaming about during the first term, and apparently might come to fruition as the economy is crashing and Trump is causing this insane trade war and whatnot. His people, and it's the White House specifically, not the Pentagon, are planning a military parade to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Army, but more so on his birthday. Um, this is again, I honestly, I actually laugh at the Victory Day parades in Russia because they always roll out there
The
um,
tanks, the missiles. Yep.
yeah, tanks, missiles, but they're like so like aged that there's always you never miss an event where a tank goes starts smoking or something happens or
That's right.
falls out of line and whatnot. So, but the bottom line is this is a, now again dictator mentality to have a military parade. I mean, do we really? As America need tanks rolling down Pennsylvania Avenue to show who we are, our
That
power.
are going to rip up
This
Pennsylvania Avenue, by the way.
so that's why he wanted to do this in 2018. And I remember the minute I heard they said that he came back and he was like, you know, so enamored by Bastille Day and whatever. Bastille Day is a people's revolution. This is not, one man. And I know that Trump has, he even floated during his first term going to Russia's Victory Day parade, which frankly is like the whole, thing of the country. I think the country lives every all year long
I've
for.
been I've by the way, I have been to the May Day parade when I was little. I think I went in like 1979. I remember it for some reason. And it's exactly what you see on TV. It is a jingoistic. I mean, this is the Soviet version. I assume it's still exactly the same.
Yeah,
Jingoistic,
it is.
jingoistic excessive show of military might to put the fear of God into other countries. But, my mentality on this stuff is if you are secure in yourself, you don't show it off. People just
And
know.
that's why America never
Yeah.
had. This
That's why
is
America
why
never had it.
countries like China,
Yep.
North Korea, and Russia have these type of parades, whereas countries like America does not have this type of parade because we know that we have a powerful military, and we also know that we used to have soft power. Trump destroyed it all, but we had soft power. We could gain your trust by feeding you and helping you with your HIV outbreak as much as we can strike to destroy a terrorist
And
organization.
China
So,
is filling that void. I want people to realize that too. China is all over
yeah,
Africa. China is all over the Middle East.
Europe.
China is filling that soft power void. They're the ones who are feeding people. They're the ones who are providing advice, whatever it is to people. Like we pulled out and the Chinese pulled in. So I don't know if he has some sort of deal with the Chinese to strengthen. I mean, despite his bullshit rhetoric and despite his crazy tariffs that are going to harm the Chinese, but let's be very clear that the Chinese have an immense vacuum that they have filled from
And
us.
can I just, to your point, there was a tragic, horrific earthquake in Myanmar a few
Yeah.
weeks ago. Um, the Chinese and Russians jumped in immediately to send assistance, help, and whatnot. The earthquake happened over the weekend. I mean, it's devastating. I believe close to
Awful.
4,000 people
Yeah.
have died, and I honestly don't even, think this is the real number because of the lack of resources.
Yeah.
But China, Russia jumped immediately, sent, aid and people to help in the recovery and whatnot. U.S., the new U.S sent three people. Three. Three. They announced that three people were going there the day after the earthquake or 2 days after the earthquake to arrive mid-week on a Wednesday. Three people. for an earthquake that is monumental. And then these three people get this is just shows you to the insanity of what we're dealing with. These three people get to me and more, are ready to assist. They get fired. Fired. The three American government workers are fired and left to sleep with the earthquake survivors. Have you ever heard anything
And
like
how
that?
did they get back on their own dime? Like,
We
nobody
don't
sponsored them?
even know how they got
Well,
back there. They didn't have a place to stay. Everything suddenly, that's it. They're no longer employed by the U.S. government, and like, thousands of other USAID workers who were serving America's soft power, purposes across the globe, providing medicines, providing food, providing, they were after USAID was dismantled, basically gutted, hollowed out. They were left there, and that's it. And like you find your way back, and that's that. Pregnant, not pregnant, it doesn't matter. You find your way back. We're not covering anything.
and let's just contrast that before we go with what happened when you had that horrible tsunami. Remember in Thailand, maybe now I can't say Thailand tsunami without thinking about the White Lotus, but um, when we had that, I think it was during the Bush administration. You had the first George Bush, Herbert Walker Bush, and Bill Clinton teaming up, if you remember, to raise money, and it sent a message to the Thai government and it sent a message to the Thai people that the United States was taking their plight so seriously that two former presidents of the United States were the people who were deployed to financially help. And to the United States was taking it that seriously. I mean, that's soft power. That is soft power. And I went to Thailand not long after that tsunami, and I will tell you, people there loved the United States.
Yeah.
I'd be very curious to know how the people of Myanmar who've been oppressed awfully by this military junta, and then the person they thought was going to be their savior turned out not to be so great. Um, but what they possibly could have thought about this versus the Russians and the Chinese who are helping them. I mean,
And
that's
I
soft
can
power.
answer, and I
Yeah,
can answer your question because the Europeans who absolutely loved Americans
sure.
now are refusing to travel, boycotting American products. Their governments are issuing travel advisories. I mean, these are our allies. Like you go to France or Italy or any country in Europe, you're welcomed. It's like, oh, an American passport.
Yeah.
You're one of us. You're welcome. Now, I mean,
So I spoke to a friend in Hong Kong yesterday, somebody who's in Hong Kong for a few months yesterday, who's a friend, and she told me that she is so nervous. She's a green card holder. She told me she's so nervous about going through customs on her way back. And this is not anybody involved in politics, involved in anything, that she's scrubbing her phone. Probably because she had a couple of text messages, I'm sure, with friends being like, oh, wow, Trump, I can't believe what he's doing. Like, I don't know what's on her text messages, but this is not somebody who's particularly political. I mean, that broke my heart that she's afraid of going through customs and immigration um, because of she's worried somebody's going to take her phone and see
and
what
they're
she might
doing it.
that she
And
might
they're
be
doing it.
that she might be a little critical of something. She might have posted a funny meme, sent a funny meme to one of her friends. I mean, it cannot possibly be anything more than that. But I
And
mean,
they're
this,
doing it. They're doing it. Just for everyone watching, be
yeah,
aware that you step in. You could be an American citizen, an American born citizen. They are pulling American citizens aside and demanding access to their phone. And they want access to social media posts and whatnot. We'll get more into this.
yeah, we'll get more into this. All right. Little announcement. We are going to do a special Substack live on Tuesday at 8 p.m. that is going to focus exclusively, and trust us, you want to hear this from us because we actually come from these horrible regimes, so we know on what is happening here from a civil liberties perspective, how it is so similar to other despotic regimes, some of which we come from, and the warning that this needs to happen. We kept talking about how not the military, excuse me, how the media in this country is not doing its job. So we're gonna have to do it for them on Tuesday at 8 p.m. and put all of this together for everybody, not specifically focused on Russia or the foreign policy aspects of things as we do on these shows, but specifically focusing on domestically our civil liberties and how they're being abrogated. So please join us on Tuesday at 8 p.m. Mark that in your calendar. We'll both send out a Substack newsletter on this, but just mark that down. And then, of course, next Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern, join us again for another episode of Pax Americana. To all of our wonderful friends in the United States, stay strong. To all of our friends around the world, not all of
We're
us are nuts.
sorry.
We're sorry. Trust us, not all of us are crazy. We're trying to fight the good fight as long as we can. Talk to your governments potentially about getting us a refugee visa pretty soon. We laugh, but kind of not.
No,
And yeah, and
very, very
thank you all
serious.
so much. Yes, but we are kind of serious. If we didn't laugh, we'd be crying. But thank you, but thank you to everybody for joining us, and we will see you next Tuesday at 8, and we will at 8 Eastern, and we will see you next Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern as well. All right, bye everybody. Bye.
Bye, everyone.